Mira Finch's shoulder struck Alaric Ashbourne's chest before her voice caught up with her feet, and for one suspended heartbeat, the marble corridor seemed to hold its breath around them. White roses scattered from his hand and rolled across the floor like fallen stars. Her fingers dug into the black wool of his coat, and when she lifted her face to his, it was wet and wrecked and terrified. "Please," she gasped. "Please save Wren. Seraphine is hurting her. She's going to make her disappear." The two guards flanking Alaric moved as one, trained by 3 centuries of court intrigue to treat anything that rushed toward their king as a blade in disguise. Alaric lifted a single hand, and they went still as stone gargoyles. He looked down at the woman clinging to him and knew her instantly, though he had never learned to see her before that moment. Mira Finch, the quiet friend who kept Wren Hensley company on the nights the manor's kitchens closed early, the two of them sharing bread by the servant's hearth. He had passed her 100 times in the halls without truly looking. Now her fear was pressed against his chest, and he could not look away from it. Mira. Her name came out gentler than he intended, gentler than a voice that had ordered executions and negotiated blood treaties had any right to sound. "Where is she?" Mira's eyes flicked toward the east wing, towards Seraphine's private suite, and her whole body trembled with the effort of not running there herself. "The pretty one. She said if Wren talks, she'll vanish before dawn. Please, she's the only family I have left in this world." Something in Alaric went cold, not with fury yet, but with the particular stillness that came before decisions no one could undo. He unwound her fingers from his coat with careful hands and turned to Bastien, the captain of his night guard. "Keep her here. Do not let her follow." Mira grabbed at his sleeve again, panic overriding the deference 3 years of service had trained into her. "No, please, don't leave her in there alone with Mira." He said her name like a vow. "I am going to bring her out. No one is taking her anywhere." She searched his face the way only the desperate search a stranger's face, hunting for the seam where a lie would show through. She found none. Slowly she nodded and let Bastien draw her back toward the stairwell. Alaric let the white roses lie where they had fallen, crushed petals scattered like snow across the black-veined marble. 10 minutes earlier, he had been imagining Seraphine's face when he told her the wedding planner had narrowed the ceremony to 3 dates, and that tonight, for once, he wanted her to choose. He had imagined candlelight and her low, delighted laugh. What reached his ears now from the east hallway was not laughter. It was the sound of water striking stone, and beneath it, a woman fighting to keep her voice from breaking. Alaric moved without sound, an old and terrible gift of his kind, and his men fell into step behind him until one motion of his fingers held them at a distance. He would learn later that Wren Hensley had brought a tea tray to Seraphine's suite because the housekeeper was occupied below stairs, that the door had been left ajar for the dress steamer still cooling in the hall, that Wren had not meant to hear anything at all. He would learn that a shattered cup and an overheard name had turned an ordinary evening into something that could not be undone. In that moment, though, he knew only that his household had kept a secret from him, and that the woman he had planned to marry was the one keeping it. He stopped outside the half-open door. He did not enter. A man did not survive 300 years of court politics by reacting to the first thing he saw. He survived by listening to what people said when they believed no one with power could hear them. Inside, Wren's voice came ragged but controlled. "She's done nothing. She heard nothing. Leave her out of this." Then Seraphine, low and beautiful and utterly without warmth. "Then remember your place. You clean this house. You do not carry its secrets. You dust around them." "I did not ask for your secret," Wren said. "I only heard your truth." A pause, then the click of heels against stone. "You heard a call you were never meant to hear. You heard a name. You heard what happens after the wedding. Forget it, or Mira Finch will lose more than her position in this house. She will lose her place in this world." Alaric's face did not change, not visibly, not in any way a mirror would have caught. But something behind his eyes went utterly still, and that was worse. He pushed the door open. "Perhaps," he said, "you should have checked the door before threatening someone in my house." Seraphine went rigid. Wren turned from the floor where she knelt, soaked from her shoulders to her waist, dark hair plastered to her cheek, her uniform clinging to her knees. Her eyes found Alaric first with terror, then disbelief, then the smallest flicker of something that might have been hope. Above her stood Seraphine Duval, with an empty silver pitcher in one pale hand, the last of its water still darkening the stone. For half a heartbeat, the afternoon light through the tall windows made her look almost holy. Then Alaric looked past the beauty into the woman underneath it, and what he saw there chilled him more than anything Malachai Voss would ever do to him. "Alaric," Seraphine breathed. Thank the old gods you're here. Are you, he said. That is not what it looks like. He looked at the water spreading across the floor, at Wren's shaking hands, at the door through which Mira had fled in tears. It looks, he said, like a woman ran to me, begging for her friend's life. Seraphine's composure cracked and reassembled itself in the space of a breath. She was not a fool. A fool could not have stood at Alaric Ashbourne's side for a full year and convinced half his court she was untouchable. Wren became hysterical, she said, her voice softening into wounded innocence, the same voice she wore at midnight galas and blood court dinners. I found her going through my jewelry case. When I confronted her, she began shouting, and Mira panicked. You know how frightened girls can be. Wren lifted her head. That is not true. Quiet, Seraphine snapped. Alaric's voice cut through the room like a blade drawn from silk. Speak to her like that again, and you will leave this house before the sun sets. Seraphine stared at him, not because of the threat, but because for the first time in the years she had known him, Alaric Ashbourne had placed a servant's dignity above her pride. Wren tried to rise and could not quite manage it. Alaric moved as if to help her, and she flinched away from him, not from him precisely, but from the ancient instinct that any raised hand in that room might mean another blow. The flinch settled in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. He turned instead to Agnes, the elderly housekeeper, hovering pale-faced in the doorway with one hand pressed to her mouth. Help her, he said. Agnes rushed forward, murmuring soft reassurances as she wrapped an arm around Wren's shoulders. Wren's first words were not for herself. Mira, is she safe? Alaric said. Bastien has her. Wren closed her eyes, and a long breath left her, as though she had been holding it since the moment the threat was first spoken. Seraphine watched the exchange and rolled her eyes with theatrical disdain. How touching. Now the performance has an audience. Alaric turned to her slowly. You poured water over a kneeling woman. She needed to be calmed. On her knees, refusing to listen. To what? Seraphine's expression hardened. To reason. Something almost like a smile crossed Alaric's mouth, and it was not warm. It was the kind of smile that lived in the memories of men who had crossed him and lost. Reason sounds different through a closed door, he said. Through that door, it sounded like you threatening to erase a woman from existence. Her face flushed with something between fury and fear. I was frightened. Fear breaks a glass, Alaric said. Fear raises a voice. Threatening to make someone disappear is not fear, it is character. He crossed to the overturned silver tray, the shattered porcelain cup, the tea soaking into the pale rug. This was not a theft. This was a woman carrying tea and walking into a secret too large for her hands to hold. He looked back at Wren. Tell me exactly what happened. No, Seraphine said, stepping forward. I will not stand in my own chambers while a maid invents stories about me. Alaric looked slowly around the room. Your chambers. My house. Seraphine's mouth closed. Wren swallowed and found her voice again, quieter now but steadier. Lady Duval asked for her dress steamed and tea brought before evening court. The door was left open because the steamer was still cooling in the hallway. I was not trying to listen. She was speaking through the mirror glass, her hands full with the gown. I heard a man's voice answer her, and then I heard her say his name. Whose name? Alaric asked, though the ice already spreading through his chest told him he already suspected the answer. Wren looked at Seraphine, then back at him. Malachai Voss. Agnes made the old sign of warding against evil. Malachai Voss was not merely a name in Alaric's world. He was a wound that had learned to walk like a man 3 centuries older than Alaric himself and twice as patient. Continue, Alaric said. Wren took a steadying breath. She told him not to call the house again. She said that after the wedding she would have your trust completely. That she would know which doors opened from within, which guards rotated when, and which night you would be alone. She said he should wait until she had become your wife. Alaric's eyes shifted to Seraphine. And the husband, he said. Because that is the word you use through that mirror, is it not? Not suitor. Husband. Seraphine laughed, but the sound came out too sharp to convince anyone. That is not what I said. Then say it now in front of me, and let me judge whether it is a lie. Her chin lifted, brittle and defiant. I said no one could know that Malachai once believed I would be his. He has been obsessed with reaching me for years. I was protecting you by keeping him quiet. Alaric looked at the water pooling around Wren's knees. By threatening to erase a woman who overheard a dangerous conversation. I panicked, Seraphine said. I needed her to stop shouting. I was not shouting, Wren said. I was asking you not to hurt her. Seraphine took a step toward Wren, forgetting Alaric entirely for one dangerous second. Because you dragged your little friend's name into this like a shield. A maid's confidant, wandering my halls, listening at my door. My friend was not listening at anything, Wren snapped, anger finally cutting through her fear. She heard me drop a tray and came because she thought I was hurt. She ran to find help because you told me she would vanish. Seraphine's lips pressed into a hard line. People hear threats they do not understand. She understood enough, Alaric said quietly, and the room went still around the weight of it. He turned to Bastien, who had appeared silently in the doorway. Bring Mira close enough to see her. Not inside, not yet. A moment later, Mira arrived at the threshold, held back gently by Bastien's steadying hand, her eyes searching the room until they found Wren. Wren, Seraphine took an involuntary step, and Mira flinched back against the guard. Alaric saw it. Everyone in the room saw it. Wren's face broke open with something raw and furious. Let her go to me, Wren said. Alaric nodded, and Bastien released his hold. Mira crossed the room and dropped to her knees beside Wren, wrapping both arms around her, careless of the wet ruin of her friend's uniform. I tried to find help, Mira whispered. I'm sorry, I ran. I didn't know what else to. You did exactly right, Wren said into her hair. You did everything right. Seraphine watched the two women holding each other on her floor with open disgust. Look at this display. Tears and gratitude on command. She knows precisely how to make herself seem harmless. Alaric turned on her, and for the first time his voice carried the full weight of what he was. If that is what you see when one frightened woman holds another, then I made a far worse mistake tonight than I understood an hour ago. You think she cares about you, Seraphine said, her voice climbing. She would have sold what she heard to the highest bidder if I had not stopped her. I would not have, Wren said, lifting her head. Then what were you planning to do with my private conversation? Wren's honesty, when it came, surprised even her. I did not know. I was afraid no one would believe a servant over your word. I thought perhaps I should run, and then I thought if I ran, you would still marry him, and whatever I heard would happen regardless. I did not know what to do. I was trying to find the courage to come to you. Seraphine gave a bitter laugh. Courage, how noble. Wren rose unsteadily, keeping Mira's hand in hers. Do not speak to me of courage when you used my dearest friend to buy my silence. The room seemed to shift on its foundation. Wren was still soaked, still trembling, still a servant, standing in a house where everyone held more power than she did. But in that moment, she stood taller than the woman who ruled it beside Alaric Ashbourne, and everyone present felt the change in the air, including Seraphine, whose eyes filled with a hatred sharpened by humiliation. You are nothing, Seraphine whispered. I clean floors, Wren said, her voice low and unwavering, and tonight I cleaned enough lies from yours to see the dirt underneath. Alaric did not hide his approval. Seraphine's composure finally shattered entirely, and in the wreckage of it, something far older and far more dangerous than an evening's cruelty began, slowly, to come into the light. Seraphine's hand found Alaric's sleeve, and he did not allow her fingers to close around it. Think, she said, her voice dropping into something softer, more practiced. The intimacy she had spent a year building between them. You know the woman I have been to you. The council dinners, the quiet mornings, the way I stood beside you when the rest of the court still feared your name. Do not let one frightened servant unmake what we built. What did we build? Alaric asked, beyond a lie with very good posture. Her eyes flashed. That is cruel. No, he said. Cruel is threatening to erase someone from the world because she overheard the truth. Cruel is letting me carry roses toward a wedding that was always a trap. Her voice dropped further, and something genuine slipped through the crack in her performance. You do not understand Malachai. Then help me understand him. You know only the war stories, she said. The monster men whisper about in back chambers. I know the man who owns people even after they think they have escaped him. Alaric's eyes narrowed on the fear beneath the anger. How long, Seraphine? How long have you belonged to him? She looked at Wren, at the guards, at Agnes still hovering by the door, and pride warred visibly with panic across her face. Finally, she looked back at Alaric, and whatever remained of her composure gave way entirely. I was 18, she said, and the words sounded like something dragged up from a long-sealed grave. My father owed Malachai a debt of blood and protection he could not repay. Malachai wanted a Duval name bound to his house. My father gave him mine, in the old rite, before witnesses. There has been no dissolution of the bond. There was never meant to be one. The room went utterly silent. Even Wren's expression shifted, hatred momentarily giving way to something closer to pity. Alaric's voice remained quiet, but carried the finality of a door swinging shut forever. You came into my house already bound to another. You let me plan a wedding I could never have legally kept. Seraphine did not answer. She did not need to. Mira, still kneeling beside Wren, whispered, Is she crying? Wren gently turned her friend's face away. Don't look, love. Do not pity me, Seraphine snapped, hearing it anyway. I pity the girl you were, Wren said, not the woman who threatened to erase my friend to keep herself safe. The words struck harder than any accusation could have. Seraphine's eyes filled, though she refused to let the tears fall. You think you understand suffering because you have someone to hide behind? No, Wren said. I think I am responsible for the person holding my hand. That is precisely why I could not use her fear to save myself, the way you used mine. Alaric watched Wren with a new and unwelcome clarity. He had noticed her before, the way a man notices order without asking its source. Tea delivered precisely on time, his study cleaned without a single paper disturbed. The quiet efficiency of a woman who moved through his house like she was trying to leave no trace of having needed it. He had never asked why she always saved the good bread from the staff table and wrapped it for Mira. He had never asked why the two of them kept to themselves near the servants' hearth on the nights the kitchens closed early. He had never asked because men who inherit power for centuries often mistake quiet people for simple ones. Tonight the quiet woman had shown more courage in a single conversation than the woman he had intended to marry had shown in an entire year. Seraphine saw the shift in his eyes and grew desperate. He came back 6 months ago, she said quickly. He found me at the winter gala. He said the old bond still held. He said if I married you, he would finally release me, after one favor. Alaric's jaw tightened. What favor? She hesitated, as though the words themselves might cause her harm. The route from your study to the old chapel. He wanted the guard rotation for the week after the wedding. He said he had no need to end you, only to hold you long enough to make your court kneel to him instead. Bastien's face darkened in the doorway. Agnes made the sign of warding a second time. And you agreed, Alaric said. I survived, Seraphine said. You planned. I was trapped. You do not know what it is to be powerless. Alaric looked at the water still darkening the stone around Wren's feet. I am beginning to learn. Do not compare me to her, Seraphine said, recoiling as though he had struck her. I was not, he said. She had less power than anyone standing in this room tonight, and she still chose not to betray a single soul to save herself. Wren looked down, overwhelmed by the plain weight of his words. Seraphine's mouth twisted. She had nothing to lose. I had her, Wren said, tightening her grip on Mira's hand. That was everything. The line settled into the room with painful simplicity, and Alaric felt it land somewhere he rarely let anything reach. He had come home tonight believing his future was sealed inside a small velvet envelope. Instead, his future had run into his arms in tears, begging him to save a woman with no name in any noble house, no bloodline, no claim on him beyond the truth she had refused to abandon. Seraphine's betrayal had endangered his life. Her cruelty had revealed her soul completely, and there would be no unseeing it now. He turned to Bastien. Send word to Corwin, quietly. I want everything on Malachai Voss. Recent movements, false names, old debts, marriage rights, all of it. No one outside this wing hears why. Bastien nodded and slipped away into the corridor. Seraphine's eyes went wide with something close to terror. You are having me watched? I am correcting the mistake of having trusted you, Alaric said. Alaric, please. His voice dropped low enough to stop her cold. Do not use my name as though you did not just hand it to my enemy on a silver plate. Wren's voice was quiet but clear. Sir, may I take Mira and go? Alaric looked at her, and there was something almost unbearable in the request. A woman asking permission to leave a room where she should never have been made to kneel in the first place. Agnes will take you both to the blue guest chamber, he said. Not the servants' quarters. The guest wing. Wren's brow furrowed. I can manage the stairs to my own room, sir. You will go where my guards can watch the door, he said. Both of you. Seraphine laughed through her tears, brittle and hollow. Now she earns a guest chamber. Alaric did not look at her. She earned safety. Agnes moved to gather Wren and Mira, and they let themselves be led from the room. At the doorway, Wren paused and looked back at Alaric. I am sorry, she said. He frowned. For what? For hearing what I was never meant to hear. He looked at her soaked uniform, at the raw mark circling her wrist where Seraphine's grip had been too hard, at the dignity she still held wrapped around herself like a coat too thin for the season. No, he said. I am sorry it took a friend running into my arms in the dark for me to learn what has been happening under my own roof. Wren's eyes shone, but she said nothing more. Then she and Mira disappeared down the corridor, and when the door closed behind them, the room felt larger and far colder. Seraphine stood near the window, the last light of evening cutting sharp lines across her face. Without an audience, without Wren's quiet strength to burn against, she looked exhausted. But Alaric no longer trusted exhaustion in her. A serpent could be tired and still full of venom. Start talking, he said, all of it. 2 days of careful, quiet investigation followed, and by the second evening, the shape of the trap had become horribly clear. Corwin's information confirmed that Malachai Voss had entered Thornfield Hollow under a false name, lodging at the old coaching inn on the edge of the woods where no one thought to look twice at a well-dressed stranger. 3 carriages, disguised as caterers' wagons, had been arranged to arrive at the Ashbourne chapel grounds under the cover of wedding preparations. A florist in town had been paid a small fortune to stay home and let strangers deliver in her place. Recovered fragments of Seraphine's correspondence, screed from an old communication mirror by one of Corwin's more delicate arts, mentioned an hour after the blessing and family papers to be signed in blood and ink both. None of it stated murder outright. In Alaric's world, nothing ever did. A private hour alone with an enemy was never merely an hour, and it was never private in any sense that mattered. Alaric went to Wren and Mira in the blue guest chamber that evening, not to command anything of them, but because he found he could not stay away. Wren sat wrapped in a borrowed shawl near the window. Mira curled beside her on the wide bed, half asleep after 2 days of fear finally catching up with her body. When Alaric entered, Wren rose immediately out of old habit. "Please don't," he said. She hesitated, halfway between kneeling and standing. "Sir, I shouldn't be sitting on the good furniture." "You should not have been on the floor of that room either," he said, and something in his voice made her sink back down slowly. He crossed to sit in the chair across from her, leaving enough distance to make clear the choice of closeness remained entirely hers. "I need to ask you something," he said, "about the call you overheard. Any place, any object, any detail of timing you can recall. Small things matter more than you know." Wren closed her eyes, forcing herself back into the memory that had nearly cost her everything. "She said after the blessing, not before. She said you would go to the old chapel office afterward to sign the family papers. She said the office had a back door only the Ashbournes ever used." Alaric's expression sharpened. "The sacristy door. It has not been opened in years. Only the eldest household staff even remember it exists." "There's more," Wren said. "She said the flowers would arrive early, white lilies, not roses, and that you should send no one who looked like a soldier, because wedding staff carrying something beautiful are the only people no one thinks to search." Corwin, who had slipped quietly into the doorway to deliver his own findings, was already turning to relay the order to stop every floral delivery bound for the chapel grounds. Alaric's gaze went hard and distant, the look of a man rearranging an entire battlefield in the space of a single breath. "There is one more thing," Wren said quietly, and something in her tone made Mira stir awake beside her. Alaric went still. Wren reached into the pocket of the borrowed dress Agnes had given her and drew out a small bronze key threaded with a strip of white cloth. She set it carefully on the table between them. "When Lady Duval grabbed my wrist, this fell from her sleeve. I did not know what it was. I only knew it had landed near the broken glass, and I did not want either of us cut by it. I forgot it was still in my hand until Agnes changed my clothes." Alaric took the key without letting his fingers touch hers, and something in his face went as pale as his own skin at the sight of it. He had not seen that key since his mother had carried it, generations past. It belonged to the sacristy door behind the old chapel office, the door used only by Ashbourne brides entering quietly before the family blessing. He had given Seraphine access to the chapel for the wedding preparations, but that key had always remained locked in the family vault. She had not simply plotted against him. She had reached into the bones of his own bloodline to do it. "Wren," he said, and his voice had gone lower, graver. "This may matter more than anything you overheard tonight." Wren looked ashamed rather than proud. "I should have told you the moment I found it. You were soaked, threatened, and trying to keep your friend safe," he said. "You have nothing to apologize for." "Still," she said, steadying her voice, "if this stops him, then use it. I do not want to hide while the people who did this walk freely into that chapel." Alaric studied her for a long moment, and it was then, holding the key that connected 2 centuries of his family's history to the very trap laid to end him, that he understood he was looking at a woman entirely unlike anyone he had ever let close to his throne. "You do not have to be brave for a war that was never yours to fight," he said quietly. "It stopped being only your war," Wren said, "the moment my dearest friend learned to be afraid of a beautiful room in your house." By the night before the wedding was meant to occur, the household had transformed into a silent machine of preparation. Bastian doubled the guard along the chapel grounds without a single lantern lit to betray the change. Every wagon bound for the estate was stopped and searched 2 streets before it could arrive. The caterers and florists redirected under polite, firm pretenses that left no trace of alarm behind them. Corwin's people confirmed that Malachai's men, dressed as wedding staff exactly as Seraphine had described, had already begun moving toward the property under cover of dusk. Alaric confronted Seraphine one final time before the trap was to be sprung, finding her in the same chamber where the water had first been poured, now dry and cold and lit by a single dying candle. He changed the timing, Alaric said without preamble. Your information said after the blessing. Every sign now points to before it, tonight perhaps within the hour. Seraphine's face drained of what little color remained in it. That is not what he told me, or you lied about it from the beginning. No, she said, shaking her head fiercely. I swear on the bond that ruined my life. He told me I had until after the wedding. He must have changed his plans without telling me. Time for what? Alaric asked. Say it plainly. Her eyes filled, and this time she did not try to hide it. Time to decide whether I would warn you at all. The confession hung in the space between them like something physical. For the first time since the ordeal had begun, Alaric felt his own iron control threaten to crack entirely. You had 6 months, he said. 6 months to tell me my own house had been sold out from under me, and the only reason I know tonight is because a servant dropped a tea tray. Seraphine said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that would not sound like the excuse it was. Alaric turned to Bastien, who waited in the doorway with the particular stillness of a soldier ready to move. Lock the chapel grounds down completely. No noise, no lanterns. Every road watched, every stranger identified before he knows we have seen him. Done, Bastien said and vanished into the dark. Seraphine wrapped her arms around herself. If he knows you've discovered him, he will run before you can stop him. Then we will not let him know, Alaric said. Her eyes widened in genuine horror. You cannot mean to let the blessing appear to proceed. Alaric, if you walk into that chapel. I am not walking into his trap, Alaric said, already turning toward the door. He is walking into mine. That night, the ancestral chapel of House Ashbourne stood lit, exactly as it would have for any ordinary blessing. Candles glowing gold behind stained glass, white lilies arranged along the stone aisle by hands that were not, in fact, florists at all. From the road, nothing appeared to have changed. Beneath the surface, every corner of the grounds had become a waiting blade. Malachai Voss, arrogant enough to believe patience alone had earned him the throne he sought, did not use the front road or the delivery path his own men had scouted for weeks. He used the sacristy door the one Wren's stolen key had revealed before he could vanish through it unseen, slipping into the old chapel office as though the room already belonged to him. When Alaric entered near midnight with Bastien at his side, Malachai was seated behind the ancient desk that had belonged to Alaric's grandfather, a bottle of dark wine and 2 glasses set out with an almost elegant insolence, a folder of binding papers spread across the wood like an invitation. Alaric Ashbourne, Malachai said, unhurried, as though greeting an old friend at supper. I expected you tomorrow. I came early, Alaric said. Malachai's smile sharpened into something ancient and unkind. You always did have a talent for ruining ceremonies. Alaric let his gaze sweep the room. The painted saints, watching in silence from the walls, the very chapel where his own mother had once stood holding this same bronze key before her blessing. The thought did not soften him, it made him precise. You believed I would sign while grieving, or drugged, or too broken to notice, Alaric said. You were wrong on every count. Malachai shrugged, entirely unbothered. People sign for a great many reasons. Grief is only one of them. And Seraphine, still beautiful, Malachai said, still frightened, still in her way useful. He tapped the folder once. She was born into a house that has always sold its daughters and called it strategy. I did not create that world, Ashbourne. I simply kept the receipt. Alaric took a single step forward and Bastien shifted beside him, a silent reminder of restraint. Malachai noticed and smiled wider. Careful, he said. The maid seems to have made you sentimental. Do not speak of her, Alaric said. Malachai's expression flickered with genuine delight. So that is what happened. Seraphine threatened the wrong servant. Seraphine has always been dramatic when frightened, Alaric said. You were never planning to release her, were you? The amusement in Malachai's face did not fade, but it changed shape into something colder. Free her, Ashbourne. I intended to bury her the moment the papers were signed. A woman who betrays one husband will betray the next. You, of all men in this city, should understand that particular arithmetic. And there it was, the final cruelty Seraphine had never allowed herself to fully see. She had sold Alaric's trust for a freedom that had never once been real. Malachai had used her fear as easily and as coldly as she had tried to use Mira's. You came for my roots, Alaric said quietly. My territory, my bloodline's authority, and the particular pleasure of watching my own court realize their king could be taken inside his family's chapel. You chose the wrong bride, Malachai said. Yes, Alaric agreed, but I listened in the end to the right woman. Malachai's smile finally faded. His hand moved beneath the desk, quick and practiced, but Bastian was faster, and the room dissolved into motion that was swift, contained, and entirely without the chaos Malachai had counted on. Alaric's men had waited in the walls, along the passage, behind the very sacristy door Wren's key had exposed. One of Malachai's men dropped from behind an old cabinet with a silver blade already drawn, only to be caught before he took a second step. The wine bottle shattered against stone. The papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Malachai Voss was forced to his knees on the same stone where generations of Ashbourne men had once knelt in prayer for sons who never returned home from war. Alaric stood over him without a trace of satisfaction, only a terrible finality. You wanted 1 clean hour, he said. You have 1 minute instead. Which of the Duval house helped you? Malachai looked up, breathing hard, still trying to hold his smile together. Wouldn't you like to know? Alaric glanced at Bastian, who set a small recording sigil on the desk and let it play a message intercepted from one of Malachai's own men, Seraphine's father, begging Malachai to wait until after the wedding rather than risk everything now. Malachai's smile finally died completely. I already knew, Alaric said, leaning down. I only wanted to see whether fear would finally make you honest. Malachai said nothing at all, and Alaric understood, not for the first time in his very long life, that fear rarely made cowards honest. It only made them quieter. By dawn, Malachai Voss was in Ashbourne custody, kept alive only because Alaric wanted every name, every debt, every hidden ally exposed before judgment came for him. Seraphine's father was taken from his own estate before he could flee across the border by carriage. The Duval family's holdings across the region were frozen through channels. Alaric had spent decades quietly building for precisely this kind of reckoning. The wedding announcement was withdrawn before the sun had fully risen, with no explanation offered to the wider court. Alaric preferred that the truth arrive slowly, like a blade drawn carefully from its sheath, rather than announced all at once. Seraphine learned of Malachai's capture while sitting across from Alaric's desk in his study, pale and hollow-eyed, stripped of every jewel but the small diamond earrings she had been wearing the night they first met. He was going to end you, Alaric said. No, Seraphine said. After using you, after the papers were signed. She shook her head, though there was no strength left in the gesture. He promised. And you believed a man who once accepted you as payment for a debt, Alaric said. Tears finally spilled down her face. I needed to believe in something. So did I, Alaric said. I believed in you. The silence that followed swallowed whatever she might have said next. He walked to the desk and set down the small velvet envelope that still held the sealed wedding date, untouched since the night everything had unraveled. I came home with this, he said. I never opened it. Seraphine looked at it and broke quietly, without any of the performance she had always worn so well. I did not want to become this, she whispered. But you did, Alaric said, without cruelty and without forgiveness either. I was afraid, she said. Wren was afraid too. Do not say her name, Alaric said, sharper than he intended. She is better than I am, Seraphine said. Is that what you want to hear? No, Alaric said. I want you to understand that being hurt once did not give you the right to hurt someone else in turn. Seraphine looked up, and for the first time in a year, there was nothing performed left in her expression at all. What happens to me now? Your bond to Malachai will be made known through the proper channels, Alaric said. Your father's role in this will be exposed. You will leave this house today, under guard, and the courts of our kind can decide what name to give what you have done. And you, she whispered. What name do you give it? Alaric looked at the sealed envelope one last time before setting it aside for good. Betrayal, he said simply. She nodded as though she had expected nothing gentler, and when the guards came for her, she went without argument. At the door she paused. Alaric, he looked at her. Did you ever love me? For a moment he saw every version of her at once. The frightened girl traded away by her own father. The elegant woman who had sat beside him through a year of council dinners. The liar who had nearly delivered him into Malachai's hands. The cruel figure who had poured water over a kneeling woman while her closest friend wept in the hallway. I loved who I believed you were, he said. That woman never existed. Her face crumpled, but he had already turned away before her tears could ask anything more of him. She left the house with nothing following her but the truth. That same morning, Alaric went to the blue guest chamber. Wren was awake, seated near the window while Mira slept curled against the pillows, exhaustion having finally softened the fear from her features. Wren rose immediately when he entered. Please, he said. Not today. Not what? She asked. Do not stand as though you owe me anything. She sat back down slowly. Is it over? Malachai is in custody. Seraphine is gone from this house. Her father cannot touch either of you. No one can. Wren pressed her lips together, and for a moment she looked away, because relief can feel indistinguishable from weakness when a person has had to be strong for far too long. Thank you, she finally said. No, Alaric said, sitting in the chair across from her, leaving space enough that the choice of closeness remained hers alone. I owe you far more than thanks. You remembered every detail that mattered. You kept a key that could have simply stayed hidden in your pocket. You stayed and told the truth when leaving would have been so much easier. I almost ran, Wren admitted. But I thought of Mira, and of what it would mean if I taught her that the only answer to fear is to hide from it. Alaric looked at Mira's sleeping form. She ran straight into my arms, in the middle of the night, terrified, to save you. Wren's face colored with something between pride and embarrassment. She should not have had to. No, Alaric agreed. She should not have. This house failed both of you long before that night ever happened. You cannot know everything that happens under a roof this large, Wren said gently. Then the roof is too large, Alaric said. Or I have simply been looking into the wrong rooms. He drew a folded paper from his coat and set it on the small table between them. Wren stiffened at the sight of it. What is that? Options, he said. A protected residence in town if you want distance from this house. A period of paid leave if you need time. A place here if either of you wish to stay. No debt attached, no condition, no order given. Wren stared at the paper for a long moment before pushing it gently back toward him. Alaric's brow lifted, more surprised than offended. Wren, your house may be safe, my lord, she said, but it is not ordinary. I am grateful, truly, more than I can say. But I do not want to build a life where safety always means guards standing at every door. Then tell me what safety looks like to you, Alaric said quietly. She met his eyes without lowering hers, something she had never quite allowed herself before. A door I can close without asking anyone's leave. A table where Mira and I can laugh without watching who might be listening. A life where being protected does not feel like being owned. The word landed harder than any accusation could have. Alaric had heard men beg, lie, and offer their very souls to him over the centuries, but he had rarely heard anyone refuse him with this much quiet dignity. He picked the folded paper back up. If you leave, he said, you will still be protected. Not as ownership, as a promise. Wren's eyes filled. You make it sound simple. It is not simple at all, Alaric said, but I gave my word before I understood what it might cost me to keep it. Something shifted quietly between them in that moment, not love, not yet, but the beginning of a dangerous and rare kind of respect, the sort that only forms when someone powerful enough to take everything chooses instead not to. 2 days later, Wren and Mira left the Ashbourne estate through the very front hall where the white roses had first fallen. Agnes wept openly while carrying Mira's small traveling case. Bastian stood near the doors, expression unreadable, though something in his eyes softened as the two women passed. Alaric stood at the base of the great staircase, hands at his sides, not touching, not stopping them, not turning their farewell into another command disguised as kindness. At the threshold, Mira glanced back. Will she truly be safe out there? Alaric answered without hesitation. Yes, even beyond these walls. Especially there. Mira nodded, some old and stubborn trust settling into her expression. Wren's throat tightened as she searched for something adequate to say, but gratitude felt both too small and too dangerous a thing to offer him fully. In the end, she only said, "Goodbye, my lord." "Goodbye, Wren," he answered, and for the first time in his long life, the manor felt too vast around him, because someone had just walked out of it carrying the right to go. For 3 weeks, Wren and Mira built a careful, quiet life in the town below the estate. The small cottage Alaric had arranged through a neutral trust was modest, clean, and far enough from the manor gates that neither of them had to pass armed guards on their way to work each morning. Wren found honest employment at a bakery near the town square, rising before dawn, and told herself that quiet, ordinary mornings were more than enough. For a little while, it almost felt true. Then the rumors began. They arrived first as whispers outside the bakery window, then as a woman clutching her purse a little tighter when Wren passed on the street, then as a neighbor lowering her voice a beat too late outside the market. "That's the one who tried to frame Lady Duval," someone murmured. "I heard she was caught stealing jewelry from the estate. Used her own friend to cover for her, they say." Wren kept walking. She had survived far worse than idle talk. But one evening Mira came home from her shift at the tailor's shop pale and silent, setting her basket down without a word. "What happened?" Wren asked, kneeling beside her at the small table. A woman at the shop told the seamstress I helped you steal from a noblewoman, Mira said, her voice unsteady. She said we should both be watched. Wren, they're calling you a thief in front of half the town. Wren's stomach turned to stone. The truth had once been strong enough to expose an ancient rival lord and save the life of a vampire king. Here, in a small rented cottage far from any court, that same truth still had to defend itself against gossip, whispered over a shop counter. That night, before Wren had even thought to send word, Alaric already knew. Corwin brought a report into his study and set it down without a word. Alaric read every line. Duval allies had begun quietly seeding stories through the merchant circles and gossiping households, painting Wren as an unstable servant caught near a jewelry case, painting Seraphine as the wronged party framed by a scheming maid. Alaric's hand closed around the paper until it crumpled. By morning, he said, low enough to make the candle flame seem to shrink, I want every Duval name buried beneath the weight of their own lies. No, said a voice from the doorway. Alaric turned. Wren stood there, still in her bakery apron, exhaustion carved beneath her eyes, dignity wrapped around her like armor forged from every bruise she had ever survived. Corwin lowered his hand from the door latch slowly. How did you get past the gate? Alaric asked. I asked Agnes to let me in, Wren said, so I could stop you before you fixed this for me. He stepped toward her. They called you a thief. I know. They dragged Mira into it. Her mouth trembled, but she held herself steady. I know that too. But if you silence them with your power, they will simply say I had no truth of my own. Only a vampire king's fear working on my behalf. Alaric's eyes darkened. They already believe worse than that. Then let them believe it a little longer, Wren said, while I take it from them myself. No, Wren said softly, though the word held no softness at all. This is the difference between being protected and being owned. Alaric went very still. What do you want then? She looked almost surprised, as though she had braced for resistance and found something closer to respect instead. A room where they have to say their lies to my face. You want a public accounting, Alaric said. I want them to speak their accusations while I am standing in front of them, Wren said. Not behind your shadow. In front of me. They will bring lawyers from the Duval estate. They will try to humiliate you. They are already trying, Wren said. Let them bring whoever they like. Alaric studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his ancient eyes. And if I speak in your defense, you won't allow it. Not unless I ask you to, Wren said, and though her cheeks colored at how quickly the answer came, she did not take it back. Alaric set the crumpled report down slowly on the desk. All right, he said. You want your name cleared by truth, not by fear. Then we will do it your way. He stepped closer, though he stopped well short of crossing into her space. But understand me, Wren, if anyone touches Mira again, if a single soul speaks to her before speaking to you, I will not wait for your permission a second time. Fair, Wren said. The faintest shadow of a smile crossed his face. You negotiate like someone raised inside these walls. No, she said. I negotiate like a woman with almost nothing left to lose but her name. The accounting was held 2 days later in the very front hall of Ashbourne Manor, the same marble floor where Mira had once collided into Alaric's arms in tears, the same stone where the white roses had fallen and been left to wilt. Alaric chose the location deliberately. If lies were to be spoken aloud, they would be spoken exactly where the truth had first arrived. The hall filled with people who had once looked straight through Wren without seeing her at all. Duval representatives, members of the town council, senior household staff, 2 impartial witnesses from the neighboring court, and a scattering of society figures who had been quite comfortable whispering rumors when she was not present to hear them. Seraphine's father arrived in dark formal dress. Grief painted across his face like an expensive perfume, and looked at Wren once before dismissing her as though she were furniture. Alaric stood near the staircase, silent, hands folded before him. His silence unsettled the room far more than any show of temper could have. Wren stood alone at the center of the hall in a plain gray dress. No borrowed jewels, no borrowed elegance. Mira waited near the back beside Agnes, her hands twisted tightly around each other. The Duval representative began smoothly. Miss Hensley, is it true you were found inside Lady Duval's private chambers, near her jewelry case? Alaric's fingers twitched once at his side, but he did not speak. Wren felt his restraint from across the room, and it steadied her, because it was not control, it was trust. Yes, Wren said. A murmur rippled through the hall. The representative smiled faintly. So you admit you were near her valuables. I was near her jewelry case because I was on my knees on her floor, Wren said, after she had emptied a pitcher of water over me. The murmur died instantly. Wren continued, her voice trembling only at its edges. I did not touch a single jewel that belonged to her. I heard her truth, and that truth was the only thing in that room valuable enough to frighten her. Agnes wept quietly near the back of the hall. The representative's smile thinned. Are you aware, Miss Hensley, that an accusation against a woman of Lady Duval's standing requires proof? Wren looked at him steadily. Being poor does not make my memory any less honest. Someone in the crowd drew in a sharp breath. Alaric's eyes never left her face. Did you, the representative pressed, use your friendship with Miss Finch to gain sympathy from Lord Ashbourne? Wren turned enough that the whole room's attention followed her gaze to where Mira stood, pale and rigid. My friend did not run to him for sympathy, Wren said. She ran because a beautiful woman in a beautiful room had just taught her that power could make people disappear. Mira's eyes filled. Wren looked back at the representative. If you wish to call a frightened woman's loyalty a scheme, then say so while looking at her directly. The representative looked down first. That was the first true victory of the day. Then, without warning, Seraphine entered the hall. No one had expected her. Her father turned sharply. Seraphine, she walked slowly, paler than Wren had ever seen her, dressed entirely in black, her beauty still present but no longer any use to her at all. 2 guards remained near the doorway behind her. The room shifted uneasily at her arrival. The representative moved toward her at once, desperate to regain control of the proceeding. Lady Duval, please confirm for the record that Miss Hensley fabricated her accusation after being caught in your chambers. Seraphine looked at Wren for one long, unreadable moment. Old hatred flickered there, followed by exhaustion, and finally something far more painful than either: recognition. Her gaze moved to Mira, still standing rigid with her arms wrapped around herself. Seraphine's mouth trembled. Her father stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. Tell them the servant lied. Seraphine turned to him instead, and for a moment the entire hall seemed to disappear around her, leaving only a girl of 18 standing before the father who had once decided her life was a debt to be repaid. No, she said quietly. The single word cracked the room open. Her father stared at her. What did you say? Seraphine looked back at Wren. The servant did not lie. She heard exactly what I said. She heard Malachai's name. She heard enough to know the wedding was never anything but a trap. Her father's face drained of color. Seraphine, stop this at once. She turned on him fully, something breaking loose in her that had been held under pressure for far too many years. You sold me once, she said. I will not stand here and let you bury another woman's name to save what little remains of ours. Wren's breath caught. Alaric's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened with attention. Seraphine looked at him once, briefly, and then away again. I am not saying this because I am innocent. I am not. I threatened Miss Hensley. I threatened her closest friend. I did what frightened people do when fear turns them cruel instead of brave. Her voice cracked, but she forced it steady. But she did not steal from me. She did not invent a single word of what she says I said. She told the truth. Her father lunged forward as if to seize her arm, but Bastien was already there, a single step between them. Her father froze. Alaric finally spoke, and his voice carried the weight of a door closing forever. The record stands as complete. No one in the hall whispered after that. Wren stood at its center, still trembling, still no more wealthy or titled than she had been an hour before. But the room no longer looked through her. They saw her, fully, and that recognition nearly broke her more than any of the accusations had. Mira crossed the hall and caught her in an embrace, both of them kneeling together on the same marble floor where the story had first begun, though this time no one stood over them with cruelty in her hands. You told them the truth, Wren, Mira whispered. Yes, Wren said, holding her tightly. I finally did. Across the hall, Alaric watched the 2 women together and felt every old instinct in him strain toward closing the distance, toward wrapping his authority around them so completely that nothing could ever touch them again. But Wren had asked for her own voice that day, not his shadow standing over it, so he stayed where he was and let the victory belong entirely to her. That evening, Wren and Mira prepared to leave the manor once more. Agnes begged them to stay for supper. Bastien offered to have a carriage brought around. Alaric said nothing at all until they reached the great front doors, where the last light of evening poured gold across the marble floor, turning the spot where the roses had once fallen into something that almost looked like blessing. Thank you, Wren said, for not speaking today. The faintest smile touched his mouth. It may have been the hardest thing I have done in 3 centuries. She nearly returned the smile. You could have ended it faster. Yes, why didn't you? He looked at Mira, half leaning against Agnes in weary relief, then back at Wren. Because you asked me not to own your truth. Something shifted in Wren's eyes at that, something no formal protection order or velvet envelope could ever have accomplished. "Good night, Alaric," she said, and it was the first time she had used his given name without being invited to. He felt it land like a hand laid gently over an old, uncomplaining wound. "Good night, Wren." Weeks passed in the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. Alaric visited rarely, careful never to let the cottage's neighbors count his carriage too many times. He came instead on quiet afternoons carrying small, practical gifts he pretended came from Agnes. A sturdier lock for the door, a book Mira had once mentioned in passing, a packet of moonflower seeds, because Wren had said she wanted to grow something that was simply beautiful, and not the least bit dangerous. "You have people for that sort of errand," Wren told him once, watching him fumble awkwardly with a teacup at the small kitchen sink. "I have had people for far too many things," Alaric admitted, soap still clinging to his pale hands. Wren said nothing, only smiled and turned away, and Mira, watching from the doorway, saw exactly what her friend was trying to hide. She saw the way Wren's shoulders eased whenever Alaric remembered to knock twice and wait for an answer rather than simply appear. She saw him leave before supper on the evenings. Wren looked especially tired, without ever needing to be asked. She saw that he brought no extravagant gifts, only small, useful things, and that Wren's smile around him no longer asked permission from fear before it appeared. One evening, nearly 2 months after the inquiry, Alaric asked Wren to come to the manor. She almost refused out of habit. "For what reason?" she asked. "No meeting," he said. "No lawyers, no Duval name spoken aloud. Only the front hall." Wren's breath caught because the front hall was never simply a room to either of them anymore. It was the place where Mira had once run in tears. It was the place where white roses had once fallen and been left to die beneath the weight of fear meeting fate. "Mira should come as well," Wren said. "Only if she wishes to," Alaric answered gently. Mira wished to. When they arrived, the manor's great doors stood open, not as a summons but as an invitation. The front hall glowed with the soft light of early evening. White roses lined both sides of the marble floor, not scattered or crushed underfoot this time, but standing whole and deliberately placed. Agnes waited near the staircase, tears already gathering. Bastien stood beside her, his stern face betraying the smallest hint of a smile Mira immediately noticed and pointed out without any shame at all. Alaric stood at the center of the hall, in the exact spot where Mira had once collided into his chest. Breathless and terrified, no crowd watched. No performance was expected. Only the people who had witnessed the very beginning of everything stood present now to witness whatever came next. "The first time I stood in this hall holding roses," Alaric said, "I was on my way to choose a lie without ever knowing it. Then Mira ran into my arms and asked me to become a better man than the one this city had learned to fear." Mira's eyes filled instantly. Alaric looked at her. "You asked me to save your dearest friend. I believed that meant pulling her out of a room by force." His gaze returned to Wren. "I did not yet understand that saving someone sometimes means letting her walk away from you entirely. Sometimes it means standing silent while she defends her own name in front of a room full of strangers. Sometimes it means waiting outside a door until she decides, on her own, whether you are safe enough to be let inside." Wren pressed a hand over her mouth. Alaric reached into his coat and drew out a small dark box, though he did not open it yet. "Wren Hensley," he said, "I will not ask you to live beneath my protection like a debt owed. I am asking you to build a life alongside me, one where protection is never mistaken for ownership, and love is never mistaken for a price to be paid." Her tears spilled over freely now. Alaric lowered himself to one knee on the marble, the same stone where Wren had once knelt, soaked and humiliated, where Mira had once clung to him in terror. This time no one stood above anyone else in cruelty. This time he knelt entirely by choice. "I cannot promise you a life free of danger," he said. "I will not insult you with a pretty lie. But I promise your voice will never have to break before I am willing to hear it. I promise Mira will never again be used as the price of your silence. I promise every door I ever ask you to walk through will remain open behind you as well, should you choose to leave it." He opened the box. Inside rested his mother's ring, old, simple, and bright, even in the fading evening light. "And if you say no," he said, quieter now, "your name remains cleared, your cottage remains safe, Mira remains protected. None of that depends on your answer tonight." Wren broke then, not because of the ring itself, but because for the very first time in her life, safety was being offered to her without a single condition attached. Alaric was not asking her to trade gratitude for love. He was offering her freedom before he had even asked for forever. "Alaric," she whispered, "I am still afraid." "Then be afraid," he said gently. "Only do not let fear answer for you." Wren looked toward Mira, who had been watching in silence, tears shining, trying to understand why happiness could look so much like grief. Mira stepped closer and took Wren's hand in both of hers. "Say yes," she said, her voice small and utterly certain. "He makes you smile. I have not seen you smile like that in years." Wren looked back at Alaric. She saw the vampire king the region whispered about in fear, a man who could have buried his enemies before the sun ever rose again. But she also saw the man who had stayed silent in a crowded hall when silence was the harder gift to give, who had waited outside her cottage door instead of simply commanding his way inside, who had learned, however clumsily, to wash his own teacup because ownership had never once made him happy. Her lips trembled into a smile. "Yes," she whispered, "I will marry you, Alaric." Mira gasped and laughed through her own tears. She said yes. Agnes wept openly. Bastian turned away, though not quickly enough to hide the smile Mira immediately pointed out a second time. Alaric slid his mother's ring onto Wren's finger, then lifted her hand and pressed his lips to it, not as a claim, but as a vow freely given. Mira threw her arms around them both at once, and for a single suspended heartbeat, Alaric Ashbourne, a man who had ruled for 3 centuries without ever once being taken by surprise, went still with something that could only be called wonder. 6 weeks later, the wedding began not at the chapel altar, but at the very front doors of Ashbourne Manor. That had been Wren's choice entirely. She had refused to simply appear at the end of an aisle in white silk, as though the past had never happened. She wanted to walk through the place where everything had started, and let every step forward answer the shame that had once tried to take root there. The white roses that had fallen so uselessly from Alaric's hand on that first terrible evening now lined the hall in full, deliberate bloom. Household staff stood openly among the gathered guests rather than hidden along the walls. Agnes pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. Bastian stood near Alaric, pretending this was merely another security duty and not the finest task he had ever been given. Wren stood at the threshold in a simple ivory gown, Mira beside her carrying the rings with the solemn seriousness of someone entrusted with a kingdom. Wren looked down at the marble floor and remembered water, fear, shattered porcelain, Seraphine's cold voice, Mira's desperate cry echoing through the corridor. Then she lifted her head. Alaric waited at the center of the hall, not at the altar yet, not standing above her, exactly where he had once failed to notice everything happening beneath his own roof, and exactly where he had sworn afterward never to be blind to it again. When Wren reached him, he held out his hand, and she placed hers in it without a single tremor. "You entered this house once as a woman people looked straight through," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hushed hall. "Today, every door in it opens because you have arrived." Wren's eyes filled, but she smiled through it. Mira leaned close and whispered, "Don't forget to smile." "Wren," and Wren laughed, the sound moving through the old manor like sunlight, finally reaching a room that had been locked shut for far too long. Together they walked to the ancestral chapel, the very one Malachai had once tried to turn into a grave for everything Alaric loved. No hidden blades waited behind the lilies this time. No stolen key was needed. The chapel that treachery had tried to claim became instead the place where an honest promise was finally allowed to finish itself. Alaric did not promise Wren a palace. He promised her a home where her no would be honored exactly as deeply as her yes. Wren did not promise to be fearless. She promised never again to make herself small for the comfort of people who needed her silence. When Alaric placed the ring on her finger, before the old stones of his family's chapel, before his household, before Bastian and Agnes and Corwin, and before Mira standing closest of all, the chapel stopped being the place where betrayal had once waited in the dark. It became, at last, the place where truth had built itself a family. I have told a great many stories over the years, and the ones that stay with me longest are never the ones about castles or crowns or ancient rivalries settled in candlelit rooms. They are the small, quiet moments buried inside those bigger stories, the ones easy to rush past on the way to the wedding, and the roses, and the happy ending everyone is waiting for. What stays with me from this one is a woman on her knees on a cold floor, soaked and frightened, who still would not let fear turn her into someone cruel. It would have been so easy for Wren to protect herself by staying silent, by looking away, by letting someone else's power decide what was true. Most of us, if we are honest, have done exactly that at some point in our lives, kept quiet because speaking up felt too dangerous, too costly, too likely to cost us the very security we were trying to protect. I do not say that as a judgment. I say it because I understand it completely. What moves me about Wren is not that she was fearless. She tells us plainly that she was not. What moves me is that she refused to let her fear make the decision for her. She chose honesty even when honesty offered her nothing but risk. And when safety was finally handed to her on a silver tray, wrapped in wealth and protection and a powerful man's devotion, she still had the courage to ask a harder question first. Is this safety, or is this simply a more comfortable cage? That question is worth sitting with, whatever stage of life we find ourselves in. Many of us have accepted a kind of protection over the years, from a marriage, a job, a family arrangement, a friendship, that asked us to trade our voice for our comfort. It rarely feels like a trade in the moment. It feels like gratitude, like relief, like finally being taken care of after so long managing everything alone. But there is a real difference between being cared for and being owned, and it took someone as clear-eyed as Wren to remind me of it while I was writing her. I think, too, of Alaric, who had all the power in the world and very little practice using it gently. His growth in this story was never about becoming softer for its own sake. It was about learning to ask different questions of the world around him. Who is standing quietly in the hallway I never think to look at? Whose fear have I mistaken for simplicity? Whose loyalty have I never once thought to earn, only assumed? Those are questions worth asking in ordinary life, too. In the houses and workplaces and families, many of us have spent decades moving through without ever quite noticing who was carrying the heaviest, quietest burdens. It is rarely the loudest person in the room who needs to be seen. It is usually the one who has learned, out of necessity, how not to be noticed at all. If there is one thing I hope this story leaves behind, it is simply this: courage is not the absence of fear, and love, the real kind, is never supposed to feel like ownership. It is supposed to feel like a door that stays open even after you have already walked through it, one you are always free to walk back out of, and choose to stay anyway. That is the kind of ending I wanted for Wren, and it is the kind of peace I hope finds each of you listening tonight, wherever you are, whatever quiet burden you have been carrying without anyone else noticing. You are allowed to be afraid and still tell the truth. You are allowed to accept help and still ask for it on your own terms. And you are always, always allowed to choose the door that leads to a life that is truly your own.